Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our office hours this week. Julie, how is it looking? I know we try to keep track of time. I don't want to go over too much. So if you think it's okay to start, we can do that.
I would say we have the potential for quite a few, so I would not hold that up. I'll just keep an eye out and let everybody in. We'll have a recording available if anybody wants to catch the beginning.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Because it is 3 o'clock, so we want to get going because we know it's been a busy day. So we'll move along. So today we are talking about IEP compliance versus best practice. And this is a part one. We do this in two parts because the IEP is a lot to take in. So welcome everybody to this training. Please feel free to drop questions in the chat. We will keep an eye on that and we'll answer them as we go. Also, if you're feeling brave, you can always come off of mute and ask questions. If I get going too fast or something comes up, please just stop me and let me know. I am happy to stop at any time or slow things down. So, with that being said, we're going to move along. So our agenda today, we'll do quick team introductions. We're going to focus on compliant versus best practice, and we're focusing on sections 1 through 5 of the IEP. And for sections 4 and 5, it's really going to be the academic sections. In part 2, we'll tackle the functional pieces of the IEP. And then we'll go over any questions that you have, and then we also have some resources that we like to share at each training. So again, welcome everybody. This is our team. We are the Supervision, Monitoring, and Support team. And my name is Carly Thibodeau, and I have been with this team for just over 3 years. And before that, I was a teacher for 21 years. And Colette Sullivan is here with me today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Colette Sullivan. I'm the Federal Programs Coordinator with the team. I've been with the department since 2018. And before that, I was a special education teacher, worked primarily with students with autism for 30 years.
Thanks, Colette. And then Julie is with us.
Hi, I'm Julie Pelletier. I'm the admin support for the monitoring team. I'm in my 9th year with the Maine DOE, and prior to arriving here, I was admin support at a K-5 elementary school for 16 years.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, and then Jennifer Gleason and Ashley Satry are also members of our team. And this is our contact information. If you want to get in touch with us, ask questions, ask for feedback, we're happy to reply. So reach out to us at any time. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about compliance versus best practice today, but this is just the kind of give you a little bit of background information in this topic. So our team has many responsibilities. However, our main responsibility is to review compliance as it relates to IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and MUSER, the Maine Unified Special Ed Regulations. So when we do our monitoring, we really look at those pieces and just look to make sure that IEPs are compliant with those regulations. So that is what becomes part of your corrective action plan or your CAP. Now, we are also, one of our roles is to provide professional development or training like we're doing today. And so when we do that, we focus on best practice because really that best practice piece is what we want for all students. And we hope that giving more information towards best practice, it will lead to better programming for students. And it also comes into play with if you come into any legal things like due process or anything like that. So please keep that in mind as we go through. So as I talked about, we talk about compliance versus best practice because as a team, we've really talked about when we focus on that review part, the monitoring part, we focus on that compliance because that is what is necessary. That's like the the bare minimum, but compliant IEPs don't always equal good IEPs. So we really talk about best practice as a way to elevate what you're doing and how you're programming for your students. And that's what we train to. So an example that we share to demonstrate the compliance versus best practice is when you're documenting that a parent chooses to waive their right to 7-day notice to implement the IEP. Compliance would be that you document that in the written notice. You make a statement just saying that the parent chose to waive their right, and the IEP will begin whenever you choose to begin the IEP. However, best practice would be to document that in the written notice and also use that optional form that's available. So obviously we are looking for that compliance piece, but when we're doing our training and our PD, we are also training to that best practice. So when we developed our IEP quick reference document, we broke it up into compliance and best practice so that you could see the difference between the things that we were talking about. So this is a snapshot of our IEP quick reference document. This link over here will take you to our resources webpage where you can access this IEP document. And in red, it is compliance, and then anything in blue is best practice. So we are going to go through each section of this IEP quick reference document to talk about those compliant pieces and also those best practice pieces. Okay, so we're going to start off with section 1 and 2 of the IEP. So again, this is just a snapshot from that IEP quick reference document. And so these pieces outlined in red, you can see them. These codes are finding codes that we use in our work when we do our monitoring. So you're probably like, what are those things? That's what they are. So you don't really have to worry about them, but if you've ever been through monitoring with our team, you probably recognize them because they do end up on your corrective action plan or your summary of findings or things like that. So if you're somebody that looks at that paperwork, these may look familiar. But you can see that there are check boxes for each of the things that you need to make each section compliant. So we're going to kind of go through these. So here's section 1. The first thing that you need to keep in mind when you are completing section 1 is that you have your annual date of your IEP meeting and that you are sending that IEP home, a copy, home to the parents within 21 school days. So that is one of the things that we look at for compliance. So we look from this annual date of your IEP meeting to that date IEP sent to parent documented on the IEP to make sure it's within 21 school days. Now, a big thing that we notice when we go on site and review is that this is often left blank. So just be mindful that if you are printing this and putting it into files as paper copies, that you are getting that date sent home to parent documented when it goes into the paper copy. Next is that the next thing we look at for compliance is that you're meeting at least annually. So that means that your IEP does not exceed the 364-day timeline. So when we review that, we look at the annual date of the IEP meeting. So you can see here, this IEP was done on, the meeting was held on 10/5/24. So then we look at the date of the next annual and we make sure that it doesn't go over those 364 days. So we would be looking for a day less than that annual. So that would be that 10/4/25. Also keep in mind that you have the duration of the IEP. That's another 364-day timeline. So it's whenever that IEP is being implemented when it begins. So here, this IEP begins on the 15th. And then that would be another 364-day timeline. So it would end on the 14th. So there are two different timelines happening here. But for our purposes, when we review, we are looking to make sure that that annual date and the next annual date are within 364 days. Okay, section 2. When we get to this part, we are looking to make sure that there is a disability category checked off. So you can see here the other health impairment is checked. So that would be compliant. If this section is left blank, then we would note that as what we call an isolated deficiency. And we would just make sure that when we are looking for correction, that you are documenting which disability category that the student falls in. Now, another thing that happens sometimes is that there are multiple disabilities checked and multiple disability is not checked. So that is something to be mindful of. Or if you check multiple disability, make sure that you are checking those disabilities that make up that multiple. So just keep that in mind when you get to section 2. Okay, I just have to pause because I can't multitask and do this at the same time, but I know there's a lot of people coming in after the fact. So I'm just going to copy and paste the links to the PowerPoint again, because I think it only shows up for those people that are in here when I post them. So I just dropped them in chat again. This is one of the things that we get a lot of feedback around is the slides being available. And we apologize that they can't be available ahead of time, but it's just something in the way that Zoom works and things like that. So we try to make them available during the presentation. We just wish it could be sooner, but we just don't have that ability. So they are there if you are able to access them. Okay, thank you for your patience with that. Section 3, this is where you take into account those special considerations or those special factors. And so again, this is a snapshot of that IEP quick reference document where it outlines that finding code that we would be looking at and what makes it compliant. So basically for this one, for section 3, you are checking off yes or no. So all of these checks need to be completed either yes or no. And in this case, yes, no, or NA. They all need to be answered because they all need to be considered. And then if something is checked yes, then there should be something in the IEP that supports that yes. Okay, so one example is 3B, where it talks about the child exhibiting behavior that impedes their learning or that of others, requiring positive behavioral interventions and supports and other strategies to address the behavior. If you check yes here, then we would be looking for either something in accommodations that would address those behavior concerns or a goal that may address those behavior concerns, something like that should be documented. So if anytime you're checking yes, you want to make sure you have something in the IEP that supports the yes. Now, another note is if you have positive behavior supports within the IEP and you're checking no, it really is best practice if you have those that you would be checking yes for 3B if they have those positive behavior supports. In certain cases, it's guidance to do that, especially with students identified as with OHI due to ADHD. But again, that's the best practice piece. But compliance is, if it's yes, it's supported somewhere within the IEP. All right, section 4, we're moving right along. This is a snapshot of section 4A and 4B. So 4A are the results of all those evaluations or most recent evaluations of the child. And then 4B are the strengths of the child. So these are the things that you would include to make sure that they are compliant, these sections. So here is an example. This is a really busy slide because this was based off of an actual student. And so they had a lot of evaluations and I did include all of them just to kind of give a whole picture, but it's a lot. So I apologize if it's a lot for you. And so here, compliance, we want to make sure that evaluations support the eligibility discussion or that the disability category that's identified for that student. Make sure that all of the evaluation names are listed and that they are dated. So that would be compliant for each of those evaluations. Also keep in mind that you want to have all of those academic and functional evaluations that support what is happening in the rest of the IEP for the student. So those related service evaluations and things like that. And then you can also include state or district assessments in this section, or transition assessments, or any other assessments that are relevant for the student. But definitely you want to include those that support that disability category. So a couple that we see most frequently are OHI due to ADHD. There must be behavior rating scales, because in MUSER, it specifies procedures for determination for the disability categories. And there are a few disability categories that are very specific to what they need for evaluations to support that disability category. And that OHI due to ADHD is one of them. Then another thing that we see is sometimes evaluations are not pulled forward that identify that disability category. So an example is with a student identified with autism. Sometimes that is done early on. And so as the child gets older, that evaluation kind of falls away, and it hasn't been reevaluated because the team didn't feel it was necessary. So if you have an evaluation that identified the student with autism, and at reevaluation time, the team was like, we don't need to do that again. We know that, that evaluation is going to be very similar. We're just going to carry that forward, or whatever. Carry the evaluation forward so that that documentation stays within that section 4A. All right, section 4B, this is the strengths of the student. So just remember that for compliance, this is really based on observations in the classroom. Like, what does this look like for the student, right? You can be a little more warm and fuzzy in this section, because this is the one place in the entire IEP where you get to say some positive things about the student. So make sure you include those positive things as much as you can. Include those areas of strength and relative strengths, but don't make it a restatement of those evaluations. You've already put evaluations in section 4A. You've talked about those and had those scores listed. This is really about more what it's like in the classroom. What do you see from a day-to-day basis? Okay. Section 4C of the IEP, this is the part where you are putting in those distinctly measurable and persistent skill gaps and the how statement. So you can see over here, we look at several things when we're looking in this section of the IEP. So we look for the skill gaps being listed. We look for that how statement being there. We also look for alignment, so that all of those gaps listed are aligned to a goal in section 5. So there are many things that we look for in this section, and this helps you go through that checklist so you can see those compliant pieces. So this is a chart that shows those broad academic areas, because those are what you think about when you think about academics. You're thinking about reading, writing, listening, speaking, and math. However, when you're listing those specific skill gaps in section 4C, you want to really drill down to the things that you're working on within those broader areas. So instead of saying that they have a gap in reading, really thinking about, okay, what am I working on with the student, in the area of reading? Are we working on decoding, or are we working on comprehension? Or maybe it's both. I mean, obviously you can have more than one skill deficit in an area, but it really should be more focused on those specific skills rather than those broad areas. So really thinking about those specific skills within these. And obviously, this is just a really like a starter list. There are many more, I'm sure, that you can come up with. But just to give you an idea of what we mean by listing those specific skills in 4C. Then also in 4C, I talked about how you did those distinctly measurable and persistent gaps, but then you also need to make sure you're including that how statement in there, okay? So you can see here that there's a gap with reading fluency for Jimmy, and his how statement says that this impacts his ability to access grade level reading material in all subject areas. So that's how it's affecting him in the gen ed classroom and gen ed curriculum. So that's really what you're thinking about when you're thinking about your how statement. How is it affecting them? So just be careful in this area. When you're writing a how statement, we're seeing a lot of more vague statements where it's just that, you know, Jimmy has a reading fluency deficit and this impacts his ability in the gen ed classroom. Well, yes, that's yes, but how is it affecting him? You know, like what's it keeping him from being able to do, or, you know, something like that. So really trying to think about that how. It's a little bit tricky. That's why we do give you some examples to try to get, you know, help you think about where to start. So here are some more examples. So here you can see that there are some reading, writing, and math, but this we've gotten even more specific. So within the reading, they're really working on the decoding and comprehension pieces within reading. And so you can see there's also a how statement here that explains how these skill gaps are affecting them in the gen ed curriculum. And they're saying that these reading gaps affect Jack's ability to access grade level content texts. Okay, so that's your how statement, and it specifically relates to how these things are affecting him in the classroom. Then with writing, you can see the specific skill within writing that they're going to work on is essay composition. And then again, a how statement of these writing gaps affect Jack's ability to accurately reflect content area knowledge. And then math, they're going to work on multi-digit addition and subtraction. And these math gaps affect Jack's ability to access higher level math concepts. So really thinking about what are those specific skills within those broader areas, listing those out, and then how they're affecting them within the classroom. A couple of best practice notes is that you're focusing on those specific skill deficits, like the decoding comprehension, essay composition, and multi-digit addition subtraction, and that they're documented in a bulleted list. We say bulleted, but really we just mean a list. This will help with alignment. So we've been told a couple of places that we visited that some of the vendors don't let you put a bulleted list in here. So we just use that as an example. You can number it, you can letter it, you can just put it in a list, you know, use any way you can to identify that these are listed out. Sometimes when you get going with a narrative, you inadvertently list more things that the student struggles with. And then if you don't have a goal related to that, then that would be non-compliant for alignment. So that's why we really recommend the list for those gaps, because it's easy to see that alignment and what you're saying they are have for gaps right now and what you're working on for goals. Okay. And then this is just a visual around the academic and functional skill gaps, because it is the same for functional, but we'll talk about that in part 2. Really needing that one-to-one correspondence for each gap that's listed. There really should be a goal for each gap. So here is an example of a section 4C. So these are the exact same things that we just looked at. So these are all the gaps for Jack. And then you can see that each goal is aligned to the gap. So this first goal is around decoding. This next goal is around comprehension. The next one is around essay composition. And this final goal aligns to that multi-digit addition subtraction gap listed in section 4C. So just being very clear that whatever's listed in 4C has a goal. All right. Any questions so far? I feel like I've been talking a lot and kind of fast. So I'm gonna.
Nothing in chat.
Okay, perfect.
I have a question.
Sure.
So with the adding and subtraction goal, where those are two different skills, should those be two different goals and two different house statements, or are they okay to be lumped together?
That is a great question. Like we say that you can put them together because addition, subtraction are kind of reciprocal skills. So you typically work on them in tandem. But if you want to separate them out, you can. But it's kind of like that for addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. But I wouldn't want to put addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division all together. So, yeah.
Carly, there are two in chat now.
Okay.
One question is, can one goal cover two needs?
Mm-hmm. So, okay, let me think about this. One goal cover two needs. No. So if there are gaps listed in section 4C, every gap needs to have a goal. So if you have two gaps, there needs to be two goals.
Right, one-on-one alignment. Yep. And then there's a question, would you include evaluations in the eval section that do not show eligibility?
I would say it depends on what the evaluation, what it is. So if it doesn't show eligibility, let's say it's an OT eval, however, they're getting OT services, then you definitely want to include the OT eval because that supports those services that they're getting.
Right.
What
Yeah,
if
you don't-
you've referred for an OT eval, they're not getting OT, the OT eval does not show eligibility? Would you include that eval?
That is a great question. Okay, so I'm going to do it this way. Compliance would be that you do not need to put it in section 4A. Best practice would be that you put those results in section 4A to show that the student has average skills and doesn't need it because it was part of that reevaluation. So I think best practice would be to include that. Colette, do
Okay.
you have a different view?
Nope. Nope, I think that's perfect.
Okay.
Yep, one more. I was told that if you have items together, like addition and subtraction, you need an objective for addition and an objective for subtraction. This came from a district audit. That wouldn't have come from us, hopefully.
Right. I was going to say, we have not given that guidance or that best practice note because objectives are not required. So if you're going to do a goal, like we've always, since I've been part of this team anyway, have stood behind the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, those being reciprocal skills, especially in that math area. And they can be together within a goal. So I'm not really sure how this came about. So just going forward, that is our guidance around that best practice piece. You can put them together. You can separate them out. It's totally up to you. But you can keep them as goals because you do not need objectives unless the student is doing alternate assessment. So
that's it for now, Carly.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to section 5, and again, we're just focusing on academic. So this is what we look at for the goals in section 5. And again, this is a pretty big list because we look at many things when we look at the goals. Okay, so present level best practice is that you have that baseline and you avoid that range. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I think I have a slide around that. And then compliance for your goals, you can see there's compliance, but then there's also a few best practice things here. So, excuse me, just keep that in mind when we talk about the future slides. And then we also look at standards being cited. That's what this finding is about. And then we also look at alignment from the goals to the service grid in section 7. And then again, objectives you can see is here, and that's only if the student is going to participate in the alternate assessment. So we'll talk more about that within the next slides. So here we go. This is best practice around that present level of academic performance. Because for each goal, you have a present level, and that present level should be aligned directly to that goal. So if the goal is around decoding CVC words, then your present level should be around decoding CVC words or whatever that skill is within your goal, stating where they are right now. That's their present level. So this is that baseline data for that corresponding goal. And then just making sure that you trust your data, avoid using a range like 60 to 70% or any subjective words like approximately, often, things like that. Trust your data, even if you just have to do, if you don't know the student very well, do a probe, a quick probe. That's your data. That's where they are right now. And you can use that for your present level. Okay, the compliance versus best practice when measuring academic goals looks like this. When we look at goals, they must be measurable with measurement data. They cannot be a specific curriculum or standard score. And if a rubric is used as the measurement, it must be attached to the IEP. And this is the big thing with the rubrics, is that oftentimes they are not attached to the IEP. So just be mindful of that. Again, if you're printing off your IEP to put it in the file, make sure you're stapling that rubric right to it. So anywhere that IEP goes, if it has a rubric for measurement, send the rubric with it. Best practice for the academic goals would be to avoid multiple skills within one goal. So one goal, one skill. And then be skill specific. Avoid those outcome-based goals. And we're going to talk about the outcome-based piece. So if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, we're going to discuss it. And then avoid using grade level as measurement. Grade level is very broad. It covers a lot of skills. So when we're thinking about being more skill specific, our measurement really should be more skill specific. So here's that outcome piece. So when we're talking about outcome, we're talking about what we want all students to be able to achieve. So if we're thinking that we want students to be able to pass their math class, then that's an outcome, okay, for an outcome-based goal. Instead, think about what you're doing to help the student pass that math class, okay? When you're working on your specially designed instruction, you're working on your goals and you're working on specific skills. Are you working on word problems? Are you working on identifying attributes of 3D shapes? Are you working on plot points on a line graph? Things like that. So be more specific about what you're teaching at the time to help them get to that passing grade. So here's an example. This is what we would call an outcome-based goal up here. Given specially designed instruction, Lydia will earn an average of 80% in her general education math class as measured by goal book data and teacher observation. So again, best practice is that you focus it on a specific skill instead of earning an average from her gen ed math class. So making it more skill-based, we've turned that goal into, given specially designed instruction and visual support, such as number lines, Lydia will accurately solve word problems involving fractions in 9 out of 10 opportunities across 3 sessions as measured by work sample and teacher observation. And this one even has a citation. Look at that. So really thinking about what you're teaching and focusing your goal around that skill that you're teaching. So here is where we talk about why you are not to include specific curriculums in your present levels or goals. Okay, so this may look really familiar to some people. It does to me because I probably wrote all my goals this way. So you have a student, Leo, is currently at level A in the pretend reading curriculum, but whatever curriculum you're using. And then your goal is that Leo will move from level A to level B in this curriculum as measured by all these things. Now, the problem with that is that not everyone has the same curriculum as you. So if the student moves from school to school or district to district or whatever, then they may not have access to that, and then it would need to be rewritten. The goal would have to be rewritten. Also, within those curriculum levels, typically there are multiple skills that are being worked on. And it's completely okay. You're using your curriculum, you're using those things to help you teach. However, instead of writing it around reaching that level or moving from level to level, really focus on those skills within the levels. So you can see here, this is what consists of level A, and then this is what they need to move to level B. Because sometimes the student will be able to do all of the consonant sounds and all the vowel sounds, but they can't read the high frequency sight words or something like that. So they're moving on in one area, but not another. So instead, you really want to focus on those specific skills. So pull those skills out of your curriculum. If it's comprehension you want them to focus on, write it around that. If it's around segmenting the CVC words, like here for Leo, focus on that. So for this goal, it's going to be decoding those CVC words, or segmenting them rather, and then also being able to identify the 19 of the 19 basic consonant sounds. So use those curriculums, but just pull those skills out and write your goals around those skills versus moving from level to level. When you're writing your academic goals, you also want to be careful. And this typically, I hate to pinpoint any one certain set of people, but sometimes it's a little more middle school, high school, just because they often go to like classes together. And also we've had feedback that this was actually given as guidance a while back, but that is not the case. So when you're writing your goals, do not write your goals directly from the standard, okay? Because we see that sometimes. What you really want to do is write the goal based on those students' gaps. So this student has a gap around comprehension. So the goal is written around answering comprehension questions. Then take a look at your standards and figure out which standard that aligns the most closely to, right? And add that standard to your goal, like here. So it isn't about going into the standards, finding the standard, and then putting it into the goal. Really think about, what's the student need to work on? This is what they need to work on. I'm going to write that as my goal. Then find a standard that links to that and use that as your citation. And that brings us to that compliance piece of linking your academic standards to, your academic goals to a standard. So compliance for this is that every academic goal has a citation to a standard. You must have that. And we see it at the end of the goals, in the middle, at the beginning. If it's there, we'll find it. Best practice would be that you are citing those goals, to grade level standards, or in the case of students that are taking the alternate, or their goals are based on the alternate academic achievement standards, that they're cited to those grade level alternate academic achievement standards. So here's an example of how you might cite the Maine learning results, because we had questions about this. Now, when you do citations to link to standards, you can do them to the Maine learning results, the Common Core, or any other district adopted standards that you may have. So this is just one way that we've given guidance around citing to the Maine learning results, because there was questions about it because it's not the easiest thing to do, especially the literacy ones, if you've ever taken a look at those. So that's just one way you can do that. Then this is just a little side note for those students, if they are identified in section 6B, that they are going to take the alternate assessment. So that means in section 6, the alternate, yes, they are going to take it. That's checked yes. They must have objectives with their academic goals. So here's an example of a student that is going to take the alternate assessment. So this is her goal. Lily is going to participate in conversations and express her own thoughts in 8 out of 10 opportunities. So because she is going to take the alternate, she needs to have objectives. So the objectives, if you notice, are just basically the same goal because they're just short-term objectives. So your goal is for the full year, right, of the IEP typically. And then your objectives break that down so that they meet those short-term objectives throughout the year to get to that overall goal. So they're still working on participating in conversations and expressing her own thoughts. But by February, she's going to do that in 6 out of 10. And then by May, she's going to do 7 out of 10. So that by the time she gets to November, she'll have that 8 out of 10. So if they are checked yes to take the alternate, they must have objectives, academic objectives with their academic goals. Now, the other piece is this alignment. So we already talked about how each skill gap needs to be aligned to a goal, a present level and goal. Now we're talking about how there must be a service in section 7 for every goal. So we look all the way through, right? So we look from the skill gap to the goals, and now we're looking from the goals in section 5 to make sure that there's a service in section 7. So here's an example of how we have, what, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 goals. These are Jack again, so they should sound pretty familiar. It's around decoding and comprehension. So that aligns to this SDI for reading. And then we have a goal around writing a 3-paragraph essay. So that would align to the SDI for writing. And then we have a goal for adding and subtracting multi-digit numbers, which would align to the SDI for math. So each goal is aligned to a service on the service grid. Okay. And I'm going to pause there because that is where we're going to stop today talking about compliance versus best practice for the sections 1 through 5. Because remember, I said we were just going to talk about academic today in part 1. Part 2 is where we'll talk about functional.
Oh, sorry, Carly. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yep.
There are a couple of questions in chat. I don't know if you want to look at them or if you want me to read them to you, whatever's easiest for you.
I can look at them. So I realize this section was discussed a while ago, but I have a question about section 3. Under what circumstances should the box, does the child have functional developmental needs, be checked? For example, does this include students receiving OT, speech, and or yes, that those are included. So the way that I think about it is if they have functional developmental goals or needs listed in 4D or goals in section 5 of the functional, then you would check yes, that they have functional developmental needs. New special ed teacher here. Where do you find the alternate academic standards to use to write your goals for those students who take the alternate testing? That is a great question. I don't know if Colette's able to find them. If not,
I'm gonna look.
I was gonna say she's gonna look.
But if not, maybe we could send them out with the certificates.
Yes, absolutely.
I can. Let me look right now though.
Okay. They are a bit tricky because the website that I have bookmarked, it's like the 1% page. And I know that the links there are broken. So then in that page, there's a MSAA like link. And if you click that, it does take you to a spot where they are. So, oh, and it's also very confusing about the alternate academic standards because they're also called core content connectors, which I don't know why they have two names. So when you are looking for the document like that you want to click on, it's actually the one labeled core content connector for literacy, core content connector for math, and I think there's one for science, core content connector for science. So be mindful of that too. That is confusing. Okay, I'm curious about that goal on a 3-paragraph essay. The essay has a lot of components. Is that goal really measurable with so little criteria? Yes. Measurable is measurable. So there was measurement data and there was a skill that they were working on around writing a 3-paragraph essay. Is it best practice? Maybe not. Maybe you could make it better. But it is compliant and it is measurable. But I totally understand why you would ask that questions because yes, a 3-paragraph essay does have a lot of components. Mhm. I think for me, because I wrote that example, I was just thinking that like it's really about having 3 paragraphs. So yeah, and definitely started changing those to be about organized writing with a beginning, middle, and an end rather than 3 paragraphs, since that is not a skill. Yeah, I think that's great. Absolutely. I'm not laughing at you, I'm laughing at me because, like I said, I wrote that example. So I love it when people point out how I can be better because it's been a long time since I've actually had to write a real goal for students in the classroom. Okay, so coming from another state where we always write objectives, are we allowed to write objectives even if they're not required? Yes. Objectives, you can always put them. Remember, they are short-term objectives. So it shouldn't just be a bunch of separate skills all written for the year. That goal needs to be able to stand alone because we only look at the goals unless it's the alternate. So objectives aren't required, but you can always do them. But just make sure that that goal is also measurable and can stand by itself. Sometimes we see people write the goal around, we'll meet the following objectives. And that is a slippery slope about whether that's measurable or not. Could I have one broad articulation goal and have the different target speech sounds I'm working on be the objectives rather than split? Yes. Okay. And then this is kind of an extra caveat is that articulation is its own skill, kind of like how we say addition, subtraction can go together because they're reciprocal. Articulation is its own skill within what expressive language kind of thing. So when we say break it up into like one skill per goal, we don't mean like one sound per goal. Articulation is its own thing. So I can totally understand that. It looks like Colette did find a link to the crosswalk for both the literacy and the math. Awesome. Thank you. And can the MELDs be used for the alternate assessment standards? Oh, okay. I'm going to go with my standard answer of compliance is that the goal has a link to a standard. Okay. We do not question where that standard is. It just has to have a citation to a standard. Best practice would be that it is aligned to their grade level standard, but that's best practice.
Carly, I have a question.
Yes.
My name's Melissa. I work
Hi.
for Child Development Services, so 3 to 5-year-olds.
Yes.
I have a question about academic skills so we sometimes get children 3 years old that have some significant needs, maybe significant autism. They're not ready to work on academics. They need to work on more foundational skills. Well, it's joint attention per se. So I don't have a goal around any academics. So I'm not checking, yes, they have academic needs. but that makes it sound like they're on par with their peers. So just wondering how to approach that situation.
This is such a good question. Oh, because we visit CDS sites, and so we do look at CDS IEPs, and we do know that CDS is a whole other can of worms when we're looking at that 3 to 5 population. Like, it is a tricky thing. Okay, so I'm going to say a couple of things. So the first thing is, even if if you're not focusing on the academics, whatever you're working on for the functional developmental things, those goals, sometimes those can also align to some academic pieces. Okay. I'm going to use things for kind of older kids because I'm not real familiar with 3-year-old things. But let's say they're trying to hold a book, right? But they're also working on sitting at a table, or, whatever the developmental functional pieces that you're working on. But holding a book, you could write a goal or an academic goal around that. There are melds out there that you could align that to. If you don't want to go that route and you're like, no, we're not writing academic goals. I know it feels terrible because you're saying that they don't have any academic needs, but I think it's more about they don't have any academic needs that we're working on right now. So if you're putting no in section 3, that's okay. You're not saying that they have no needs. You're just saying that they're not in this IEP.
Okay.
Because your
And
documentation and your conversation about all of those student needs are in the written notice. They're in those evaluations. They are documented. You're just saying right now, it's not needed in the IEP.
okay. And often we'll create an academic goal, and the present level would be so-and-so needs to build foundational skills before academics are targeted. And then under the goal, we put like NA. Is that okay?
Just put, there are no academic goals at this time in the present level.
Okay.
Do,
All right.
do not make the statement about you're working on those functional developmental things. Just leave
Okay.
that out.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I see another question that says, are you saying you want the grade level standards of the grade they're actually in or that they're working on? So that best practice piece where I talked about aligning it to their grade level, that would be the grade level that they're actually in. But again, compliance is aligning, just having a citation to a standard there.
Remember with melds though, there are the infant and toddler melds for 0 to 3 and then preschool for 3 to 5. So you wouldn't align to melds for students over that age. That's for the preschool kids.
Okay. All right. So we're just kind of coming to the end of this. I do have a little quiz. Don't feel pressured that you have to participate. This is only if you're up for it. No pressure at all. Okay. So we're just going to talk about, why is this non-compliant? So if you take a look at this section 4C, we've got some gaps listed here and a house statement that you can't really read. So it's not about the house statement. It's really about the gaps listed. And then you see the academic goals, which may be really hard for you to read. So this may be a little bit harder because of the font size. I apologize for that. But there's a little hint. If you count the number of bullets and you count the number of goals, it'll give you an answer of why this is non-compliant. Because this is about alignment. And it looks like someone got it in chat. Exactly.
Conventions.
There's a gap listed with no goal aligned. Exactly. So you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gaps, but there's only 4 goals. So automatically I know that there's an extra gap in there. There should be a 5th goal. Right. Exactly. You guys got it. Thank you. So just a reminder that each gap requires a present level and goal aligned to it. So if you have 4 gaps, should be 4 goals. Let's try another one. Again, no pressure, only participate if you want to. Why is this one non-compliant? Okay, we've got a present level of Margaret demonstrating reading skills at the 4th grade level. And then we've got a goal around Margaret demonstrating reading skills at the 5th grade level as measured by data collection, teacher observation, work samples are similar. Yes, exactly. People are getting it in the chat. You've got some best practice things too, so that's great. It's too broad. It doesn't have the percentage is the big thing. It's not measurable because we're really talking about non-compliance, but you guys got a lot of the best practice pieces too. I couldn't read them. They were coming in too fast. Right. It was outcome based. It wasn't measurable. It was too broad, needs to be more specific. Exactly. But the real piece here is that it wasn't measurable because there was no measurement data included in the goal. So here you can see instead it's that she's demonstrating reading skills at the 5th grade level as measured. Oh, hold on. Just kidding. Forgot to click to the next slide. This is the one that is measurable. Margaret will demonstrate reading fluency of 80% when presented with a 3rd grade reading passage. So there is your measurement. Very good. Okay, I got one more for you. Okay, this isn't non-compliance. This is a best practice piece. So we're asking, how can we improve this goal? So the goal is that Jack will read with, because this is my favorite goal, Jack will read with sufficient accuracy and fluency to support comprehension with 80% accuracy. Now, I'll give you a little hint that this is taken directly from the standards, and we've seen this a lot. And so yeah. So what do we think? Just focus on comprehension. Right. There's a lot of stuff happening in this standard that is the goal. He's reading with sufficient accuracy, fluency to support comprehension. So you've got a lot of things going on. So exactly, focus on that one skill. It's really make sure it's based on that skill gap and not copied from the standard. Because like I said, this is that standard one that we actually see quite frequently. So instead, here's Jack again. You guys have seen this example a few times now, but he'll answer comprehension questions regarding a beginning 4th grade level text with 75% accuracy. And then any questions? I did see one pop in between answers. So to go along with that quiz question, I have another quick question. Let's say that a student in 4th grade is working and decoding words with vowel patterns, and I can only find a CCSS that applies to that goal in the 2nd grade category. Is that compliant? If you write the goal and you have a citation, it is compliant. Yes. Okay. You guys have been awesome. Thank you so much for all the questions. I am trying to kind of wrap it up because we're nearing 4 p.m. So I want to make sure we get out of here on time. So join us for part 2. We're going to do this fun stuff again in 2 weeks, October 8th, from 3 to 4 p.m. again. We're going to do the functional and then the end of the IEP, which is like 6, 7, and 8. So accommodations, service grid, LRE. We'll talk about those pieces. Here are the resources that we love to share. We've had to go to more of our webpage links because our links get changed all the time. We tried to give you direct ones to the documents, but it just didn't work out. They kept dead ending and we wouldn't catch it. It was a whole thing. So anyway, we like to share IDEA Muser. Remember, IDEA is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Muser is the Maine Unified Special Ed Regulations. The procedural manual, awesome resource. If you haven't used it, try it out. All the special ed forms, instructions, directions. Procedural safeguards, if you want to know where those are. You can find all those links at this link here, which is one of our web pages. And then this is our supervision, monitoring, and support page. So this is our main page. If you ever want to get in touch with us, go here and you can meet the team. And that is how you get in touch with us. And then this is our resource page. So we have information sheets that talk about different things that you can find in Muser, but it consolidates them into one document. instead of being all over the place. We have a self-assessment form that will help you go through your IEPs and do compliance for each section if you want to try that out. And then our quick reference documents. So we went through the IEP one today, but we also have one for all of the eligibility forms and the written notice and the summary of performance. So you can check those out at this resources page. This is our professional learning page where all of our recordings go. Excuse me, Julie does an amazing job of getting these edited and ready to be put up on the website as soon as she possibly can. And then Jennifer, our other team member, makes sure that it goes through the process to get them on the website. So takes some time, but they do end up here eventually. So you can access these at any time. So check them out. This is our PD schedule for the 25-26 school year. We are here, okay? And so we have all of these coming up. We have some guest speakers coming in on some Wednesdays. Then we have them all going throughout the year until the end of May. So these links, if you have the PDF versions of this, you can click these links and register immediately. I'm going over, trying to go fast, I'm sorry. Then we have more resources and forms and things for families that can be found at this link. And then this is our professional learning feedback and contact hour form. So we really do appreciate feedback. So if you are able to fill this out, that would be great. Give us some feedback. We adjust our PD as much as we can based off of that. When you select today's training, it is today, which is 9/24/25, and it's compliant versus best practice part 1. So select that training, enter your email, and you will get a contact hour certificate and a whole bunch of other things, goodies, as we call them. This is where you can find Maine DOE online, social media, and our contact information, because we really are here to support you. So please reach out with questions, or if you want feedback around something, is this compliant? Is this best practice? We're more than happy to answer those questions or provide that feedback. Just please don't send us any student information. Leave it off of an IEP and or any form or anything like that. Just copy and paste it, put it in an email, and we're happy to get back to you. So this is our contact info. You're welcome. It's good to see you, Allie. And let's see, what is considered grade level math if you are a junior in high school? Okay. Somebody responded to that and said our school it's algebra 2. If you're a junior in high school. I don't know if I know the answer to that question. I'd have to look at, I don't know. That's a good question. You'd have to look at the standards, I guess, to see which one, like what standards fall in there. I'm not 100% sure. Okay. Well, I appreciate you sticking with me. Sorry, I was over time a little bit. Yeah, thank you for all of your time this afternoon. This has been great. And the questions were awesome. We appreciate it. You're
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you. We'll see you at part 2, maybe.